Once again, hello everyone. It's about a minute after the top of the hour. We'll get started in about 2 minutes after to give everybody a chance. People are always kind of racing to join, coming from one meeting to the next. I'm excited that you're joining us today in our DevSecOps Bunch series. It's February. It's freezing, snowing, cold, and everything else across much of the US, including where Dan is. I'm excited to have my friend Dan Cornell here with us from ThreadFix. We'll be talking about optimizing security velocity in your DevSecOps pipeline at scale. So as we get prepared to get started here, I've got a few housekeeping items for everyone. So first off, we are recording this webinar. So you'll receive a link to the webinar next week for everyone who did register for it. We are going to do live Q&A at the end. So please ask questions as we go and we'll answer those at the end. You should see a Q&A box in the Zoom menu. Please leverage that. We do have an open chat, so you can actually interact with each other. We do have chat moderators as well. If you have a direct question for Dan and I, please use the Q&A. If you want to chat with each other, feel free in the chat box. And so that we'll have some team members in there as well, sort of moderating and able to answer questions as we go in the background of the chat. And then make sure you stay to the end. So we got some fun questions and a prize giveaway at the end that we'll crank out as well. And so with that, we're going to get rolling with our DevSecOps bunch, optimizing security and velocity in your pipeline at scale. And so with me today is Dan Cornell. And Dan, we'd love to have you introduce yourself and then roll into the agenda and we'll get going.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Dan Cornell. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Denim Group, the creator of ThreadFix. I was the original creator of ThreadFix. Now it's got an actual a team of professional engineers that does the development, which is very much for the best. And my background, I'm a software developer that came into the world of security. And so when I kind of my view of application security is guided by that, where instead of being somebody who came from a sysadmin or a network pen testing background into the area of app and mobile security or web and mobile security, I'm a software developer who built systems, but for the last 15 or so years of my career has focused on the security impact of that.
Thanks, Dan. And so I'm Brian Reed. I'm the Chief Mobility Officer at NowSecure. I've been playing with all things mobile since the early 2000s, dating back to BlackBerry. I even did a mobile banking app on a compact iPad in the late 90s. Talk about history. And so I serve as the Chief Mobility Officer. I spend a lot of time with our customers on strategy. I also do a lot of benchmarking and great events like we're doing today. So we're going to talk a bit about the state of app security. We're going to look at the notion of how to power a more secure pipeline to get the speed, velocity, and efficiency, and mastering that volume issue. And, Dan and I both have been working in clients where you get more than a few pipelines, you get more than a few tools, and suddenly your data is the problem. And now you can efficiently process that. That's why we're so excited to be partnering with ThreadFix on this journey. So a little bit about NowSecure. So we've been in mobile since the birth of modern mobile. It's interesting if I look back at it. In 2008, we saw the iPhone. 2009, we saw the Android device. Guess what? NowSecure got started then. Our founder was really experimenting around forensics and mobile forensics and actually wrote the first books, taught the first classes, performed the first mobile forensics for commercial clients and government agencies going all the way back to 2009. Kind of like Dan, journeyed into this space, not a security person, but has landed in mobile AppSec. And as over time we've evolved, we work with a lot of the major companies you might know. Some of you, I think, might even be on this call from some of these organizations. We work a lot with standards bodies. We believe a lot in standards. So we sponsor the OWASP Mobile Top 10, Mobile Project, MASVS, API, and so on and so forth. For those of you who are hardcore security people, you might know Frida and Radari as reversing tools. The creators of Frida and Radari are part of our research team, and they're embedded in our products as well. So we love mobile and all things mobile security, and that's what we're here to talk about. So Dan, a little bit about Denim Group.
Yeah. So at Denim Group, what we do is we help organizations more repeatably create secure software. We do that in a number of ways, both on the services side. We do a lot of testing for applications, for IoT, a lot of help organizations set up threat modeling programs and otherwise build out their secure DevOps and their security development life cycles. We also build ThreadFix, which is the application vulnerability management platform that we'll be talking about today. and just otherwise help organizations again try to craft these security development life cycles so that they are more repeatably creating secure software.
We love secure software together, and that's for sure. So one of the things, if you attend our webinars, we like to do polls. So I'm going to ask Kelly to fire off our first poll here, and you'll see a box pop up in the middle of your screen. And so for the first question, we're interested in what best characterizes your SDLC. Are you a waterfall team? Are you an agile team? Are you all the way through DevOps and into DevSecOps? This kind of helps us understand the crowd who's here, helps you kind of understand your peer group who are attending today as well. And so we'll leave it open for about 10 or 15 seconds. It looks like actually we have 3 people in waterfall. That's pretty wild. I'm sorry for you. We have a handful of people in DevOps and actually a fair number of people in DevOps and DevSecOps, about an equal number showing up in Agile. So let's give it like 10 more seconds and then we'll end the poll and Dan and I can comment on what we get. So there we go. So having a look at the final results, Dan, as we might expect, lots of Agile, kind of an equivalent amount if you add up DevOps and DevSecOps as well. When you're engaging with clients, where do you find them in the life cycle? Is it all over the map or is there a cluster typically?
I mean, it's really all over the map. Most organizations, thankfully, are at least to a large degree moved out of waterfall into more agile practices. And we're seeing a lot of the organizations that are doing DevOps or DevSecOps. Those tend to be specific teams within the organization, pilot programs, where they're then trying to learn from that and roll that out more broadly across the organization.
Got it. It looks like our world too. All right. So Kelly, if you want to pull up the next poll, we've got a second poll for folks. This will be the end of our polls. And this is really looking at what volume of testing, scanning, manual testing, what have you, are you running on a weekly basis, right? You may have a high velocity development group and only a few apps and lots of scans going on and testing going on, or you might have a whole lot of everything, or be slower. So we're always interested in kind of volume and throughput needs, and that's a big part of what we're going to talk about today. So we'll give it another sort of 15, 20 seconds. And we tend to see an interesting distribution. Dan, you guys are in the volume business predominantly, and that's where we see you, and our biggest volume customers right together are there as well. So 5 seconds, I'm going to end the poll, and there we go. So let's take a look at that. So it looks like the dominant is in that 25 to 100, but you got some bigger ones also. Thoughts on these kind of results?
And this is something, as you mentioned, that we'll touch on, but what we're seeing is as organizations have these digital transformation initiatives, right? I mean, it's a little bit of an overused marketing word, but it is a real trend where organizations are saying, we need to understand better how to use software so that we can innovate faster, iterate more quickly. And that then turns into new architectures like microservices, adopting DevOps and DevSecOps cultures. We start to see testing integrated in the pipeline, and so we're seeing a lot of organizations really start to ramp up the volume where they have multiple testing methodologies and are starting to move portions of that into CI/CD pipelines. And so we're seeing a lot more application assets that people are tracking, as well as again much higher volume of testing.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the wide myriad of application architectures too is making it harder and harder, right? A lot of teams may have lived in web apps, but now there's a zillion different kinds, and we're going to talk about that today. So as we roll on, right? So if we sort of think about it, we're all here stuck at home. Most of you, I bet, on this are stuck at home or some other non-place of work, and we do know that applications run the world. And so, most of us on this call are here trying to service our customers and our user population. And any of us who've been around security, whether you come from development like Dan does, or you come from strategy and architecture like I do, delivering secure apps at scale is always a challenge, right? Feature innovation tends to take priority. Not everybody's fully trained and understands the most secure way to code apps. And so we're trying to help organizations, find their way through this. So Dan, what are you seeing in terms of issues out there? I'll pass this slide to you.
Mm-hmm. And I think you touched on some important things. The installed base of of coders, if you will. If you look at the way that people learn to code, they're going through university programs, maybe they're going through code academies, and security is not woven into the fabric of that sufficiently well. And so what you end up with is the people that are building these applications where the developers have control over the security, right? Like the decisions that they make have a direct impact on the security of the applications that everybody depends on. Those folks come into the marketplace not necessarily having a strong background in security, and the focus for most organizations is features, functions, and timelines. It's not like, did we do this entirely correct? And again, I think the incentives in a lot of cases are out of line for organizations that allow them to build up a lot of technical debt. These are some stats looking at the challenge being that these applications that we depend so much on, they all have flaws, and it takes a long time to get those vulnerabilities remediated. The state of network and infrastructure vulnerability management is bad enough, right? But in those cases, you have essentially patches that you're applying or configuration changes that you need to make. With software, you actually have to have the coders go in and make changes. Those have to be validated, and those have to be then pushed live out into the environment before you get the benefit of the work that you've done. I think you had Jeff Williams from Contrast on an earlier iteration of this webinar series, and he said something a couple years ago that I like to steal. If you look at infrastructure patching, it's kind of like playing with Lego bricks. If you look at application vulnerability management, it's like silly putty, because there's more than one way to do things. And so I think that leads to the challenges. And as a result, we see that these application vulnerabilities tend to linger. They tend to stick around. And that's, again, scary, because these mobile applications, the web services they rely on, the web applications, really important, valuable stuff goes through there. We rely on those for work. We rely on them for commerce, and so to have these vulnerabilities remain, it puts us in a scary situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we kind of look at the mobile world, right, we kind of look at it through two lenses. So, well, interestingly enough, mobile now dominates all digital time and traffic. ComScore measures this, and about 69% of all digital time last year was spent in a mobile app, not a web app. And that's been, extended because of the nature of the world we're in now with more remote people, right? So maybe you didn't even know what DoorDash was before, but now you're using DoorDash to order food and, things of that nature. There was something like 130 billion new mobile app downloads last year, which was about 60 to 70% increase over the year before. So this notion of remote living is driving that. And what we tend to find, we benchmark, we security test, privacy test, and benchmark the mobile apps in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. And as you all know, there's millions of those guys. And we actually find that 85% of them have security vulnerabilities, and about 70% of them leak private data, which is pretty horrific. From that perspective. And a lot of that is because of lack of developer skill. Some of it's just lack of testing. Some of it's racing to get the app out of the door. And so features trump security. And for those of us who live on either side of the dev or security bridge, we know that all happens. And a lot of it comes back to knowledge, understanding, tooling, and actually the ability to automate. And one of the things that Dan's organization realized and grew, and our organization realized and grew, is security automation is critical. The only way to do this, there aren't enough humans, there isn't enough knowledge, is through layers of automation in your infrastructure. And DevOps is all about automation in the first place. So this is just more of that. So as we step into it, there's really kind of four areas of pain, right, that we're all dealing with. And so you got the business pressures to move faster. You've got the massive volume of digital stuff, as it were, and the vapor trail that creates, and speed, velocity, data, stakeholders, and all of that. Fragmented tooling and process, silos between different departments. And mobile security, frankly, often lags web, right? The first three fit everybody, and that's what we've seen. So all of this requires automation, requires integration, requires understanding the differences between mobile and web, and really enabling all the stakeholders that are involved with app production, whether it's web or mobile or backend or whatever you're doing. It's all about secure production ultimately within the organization. So when we kind of think about a pipeline, Dana and I are going to kind of talk about the problem, thinking about a pipeline and many pipelines, is everybody's got some diagram like this. So you start with requirements and design coming out of PM, then you go write some code, you commit the code, you do some builds, you test, have that nice rinse and repeat cycle. You know, depending on whether you're agile, DevOps, or DevSecOps, that may move faster or slower. Most people trying to move with speed, and then eventually get to staging and deploy, right? Your motherhood and apple pie on how this runs. But this gives us a framework to have a conversation about how do I make this machine run faster and build security into the machine while the machine is running. And so, you know, Dan, one of the interesting things when we go into an organization, they may have a couple pipelines for mobile, but they may have 1,000 pipelines because of all these other things they're doing. There's a big challenge here in trying to bring all this together, isn't there?
There really is. And as I mentioned before, you have these so-called digital transformation initiatives. And so what we're seeing coming out of that, these new architectures, instead of these monolithic applications, you break things into microservices, right? So now instead of trying to make one giant blob of code work, you're trying to make 30 separate blobs of code work together, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing a proliferation of these application assets. And again, similarly with adding things like mobile applications, IoT applications, we're seeing a real proliferation of application assets, right? So there's just more things that need to go through a pipeline, or that needs to be tested. As organizations adopt this DevSecOps culture, what we see is they start to incorporate certain types of testing into these pipelines. So they're incorporating certain security activities into the CI/CD pipeline. So you've got more testing results that are coming out. So the end result of that is that you have both an increase in the data volume as well as an increase in the data velocity. And that just creates a challenge in an environment, frankly, that was already challenged, right? Nobody I've ever talked to feels like their security team is overstaffed. No one feels like their security team is underworked. If you work in an organization where you feel like your security team is underworked and you're hiring, please let me know. I will send you my resume. And so really the way that we look at this is thinking about it from a coverage standpoint, right? You've got this portfolio of application assets, and per Gartner and others, you probably need to do different types of testing in order to feel like you've sufficiently triangulated the various security challenges that exist in that particular application. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about NowSecure's technologies. You guys have kind of a different view on mobile security than a lot of the SaaS vendors that may have rules for mobile applications. But with the stuff that you guys do, both the static analysis, the dynamic analysis, the interactive analysis, looking at the problem from multiple directions, that's great because you're exposing different types of potential weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And so, with this increase in the testing volume, increase the types of testing, it really drives a need for efficiency and prioritization. And so we find these organizations that have these huge portfolios of applications of different types. They're dealing with a data management problem and a data communication problem, right? How do I manage this large volume of data that is coming out of my testing program? And how do I analyze that data, but then get it in front of the appropriate stakeholders in the organization, in front of the right development team, in front of the right DevSecOps or DevOps analyst, so that they can actually take action to fix the problems. So that's the problem that we're seeing in a lot of organizations.
And totally agreed. I think you're the point of view that you bring to the table that I'd never really realized is I did data warehousing in the 90s, and I never thought about this as a data problem. And when you change it into a data stakeholder and flow problem, it helps you figure out how to organize and attack it, right? So as you said, there's a zillion tools. There's a lot of technology pipelines running. There's a ton of data being generated right throughout the entire scenario. And when for those of you who joined us today, when you're thinking about what do you have, you will have some of these yellow boxes. You may have other things that we didn't even list that are part of your testing infrastructure or your security infrastructure. And all of these things somehow have to squeeze their way through the pipe, and using different kinds of tools and approaches. To basically all of us, it's about eliminating the security bugs and minimizing the bad ones, right? And from that perspective, it becomes a bit of a game of whack-a-mole. There's this sort of joke about, it takes a village. Well, it seems to take a village to get a secure app out the door, whether it's mobile or otherwise. Now, I'm going to spend a few minutes kind of drilling into mobile, right? So a lot of folks we work with come from the web or the network security world and are kind of new to mobile. And so as you start looking at mobile, it's more different than web than it's like web. And that's kind of an interesting brain change, right? So we all know static source tools provide a high number or generate a high number of false positives, right? With mobile, it's actually possible to, by testing architecture, test mobile app binaries instead of source code. And when you do that, you crush the false positives if you've got an effective test engine. So in mobile, dynamic is better than static, whereas in web, more people use static than dynamic. In mobile, it's actually possible to automate dynamic. Now, traditionally, when we get involved with an organization, they're doing manual pen testing, whether it's insourced or outsourced, and that clearly does nothing to speed up your pipeline. And, when we look at the actual test coverage, it's 20% of the vulnerabilities found in the real world are caught by traditional static source. The bulk of vulnerabilities that actually occur in the millions of apps we've tested in the App Store are actually discovered through dynamic testing, because it's not about the line of code you wrote, it's how the control flow works or something else. And static just never finds it in their ability to kind of glue it all together. So what that means is late stage testing. Late stage testing means stuff squirts out the door, right? A lot of security exceptions get granted, stuff goes out the door. And that's why we have those pretty rough stats about what we tend to find in the pipelines. And so there is a way to solve your testing problem in the pipeline. And there's automated mobile application security testing that comes from best of breed vendors like NowSecure that really is designed to solve this problem, right? And what makes NowSecure unique is we come at the problem from pen testing and forensics. No one who founded our company or works in our company early on came from any traditional security testing vendor. We're all pen testers. And so what we built was a tool that was like an automated pen test. The whole idea is, how are attackers going to reverse engineer and attack my mobile app? Let me build software to replicate the work of a manual pen test and try to automate as much of that as possible. Clearly, not everything's automatable. So we're not going to claim software can replace the intelligence of a human. And architecturally, there's some great things, right? So I test a mobile binary. That eliminates language dependencies. It doesn't matter what the mobile app's written in. Traditional static source code's worried about what language you're in. You're waiting, you get delays for language compilers. No, we don't. Doesn't matter. Any language as long as it runs. Monitoring behavior. We talked with Contrast last month about injecting test code into the application and monitoring the application from inside out. That's really where you get an accurate understanding of what's really a security vulnerability and an issue and what really isn't. Use real devices running in the real world. Emulators and mobile are bad things because they just miss too much. Leverage standards and all the other good stuff. And these all kind of make really key best practices if you're looking at what should be on your mobile checklist. We have a fuller checklist later in the session you can look at to give you that full download. And so when we look at how NowSecure actually operates, and then I'm going to hand it to Dan, NowSecure runs in a dual mode. So we plug into your tool chain and we can run in an on-demand mode, meaning any of your stakeholders can invoke a test whenever they want. Dev, QA, security, ops, whomever. But we also run in autonomous mode. And in autonomous mode, it's really exciting. Your build system builds the app. The build system passes the binary to NowSecure. NowSecure will run our full battery of hundreds of tests. Coming out the other end, NowSecure will generate tickets, individual tickets, into your ticketing system for everything we find. What does that mean? No human. That means it runs 24 hours a day. That means it tests the same way every time, every build, in whatever way you want to configure the test to run. And so that gives you the faster feedback loops. That gives you the ability to bake security in without a giant security staff, as we said earlier. What's great about the output isn't just, hey, here's my 5 or 10 vulnerabilities. The output doesn't include all those false positives because we have like a less than 2% false positive rate. But the output also includes all the things that the developer needs. When we think about the purpose of security testing, it's not actually about just finding vulnerabilities. It's about making sure the developer can fix it quickly and easily, right? You want to have credibility as a security pro saying what you found is real, but you also want to guide the developer to resolving issues. So all the output that we generate includes code examples, context details of where the vulnerability was, and so on and so forth. And that allows you to collapse that mean time to repair for those folks. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over here to Dan to talk about the vulnerability management challenge of I'm feeding you lots of mobile data, but guess what? There's a ton of other data everywhere else that you got to deal with.
Exactly. And so that's the challenge is, and again, you guys have a very specific thing that you do for mobile applications. But if you look at these large enterprise environments, again, they've got web applications, they've got web services, they may have deployed IoT applications, they may have thick client applications. And so you've got this entire portfolio of different types of applications. And for different types of applications, you're going to be doing different types of testing using different testing tools. And so a real challenge is that you have this vulnerability and weakness data coming from your automated code review. That's going to enter the pipeline, or that's going to be exposed at one point in the pipeline. These different types of analysis are going to provide different types of insight. Again, what you're going to get from a web application scanner is going to be different, a different perspective of potentially even the same vulnerability. That gets exposed by static analysis. Tooling is going to produce false positives, and the vulnerabilities that come out, have to be contextualized and prioritized. Just because the tool says it's critical, maybe the tool, doesn't understand the context of the application or some regulatory constraints, something along those lines. Similarly, you may have a tool kick something out that's as a medium, but that needs to be reprioritized higher because of some additional context about the application. And as we've said, this leads to a huge data volume, especially as you look across enterprises where they have tens, hundreds, thousands of application assets, and hundreds or thousands of application developers that are working on these applications. And once you've identified, contextualized, and prioritized these vulnerabilities, once you've done that, then you need to route them to the right team for remediation, right? As you mentioned, getting that in the form of tickets, that's been a very powerful way to communicate with developers. You want to communicate with the developers and the tools that they're already using. So, looking further at these challenges in the pipeline, again, you've got many different types of applications. You're doing different types of analysis. And so what you want is for all of this to go through a unified process, right? At the end of the day, taking a step back, I need to be able to look as a security manager to look across the portfolio of applications and identify what are the applications and which are the vulnerabilities that are really exposing me to risk, that really have me worried about right now. And so you want a unified approach, because it's not necessarily that I'm scared about a mobile app versus a web app, right? Again, I'm concerned organization-wide, what are the things that are exposing us to the most risk? So what we do with ThreadFix, again, allow you to integrate a lot of these testing tools in the pipeline along with the asynchronous stuff that is going on outside of the pipeline. And we handle that data management. So, doing the deduplication and the normalization of the vulnerability data as it comes in. And again, by doing this in a continuous manner in a pipeline, that lets you always have, up to recent, up to the minute, continuous, or at least very up-to-date information about where your vulnerability management program stands. Oh, can you advance a slide there?
There it goes. I got it.
Okay,
sorry,
perfect.
focus was off.
Yeah, and so if we look at this cycle for the ThreadFix and the remediation lifecycle, we're pulling in the data from all of these different assurance activities. So if you're doing manual tests, code reviews, penetration tests on a periodic basis, that data comes in, and it also comes in along with all of the data coming from your automated testing tools. So if you're doing static analysis, dynamic analysis, interactive analysis, software composition analysis, as well as your network and infrastructure scanning of the infrastructure supporting these applications, as well as if you've got mobile data coming in from NowSecure, like all of that data comes into ThreadFix. We normalize and deduplicate that data. And what we see here is up to a 35% reduction in the overall finding count. And the value there is what you're doing is reducing the amount of stuff that your security analysts need to review because there are fewer findings overall. And in cases where we've normalized and deduplicated these vulnerabilities, we're providing better context to that analyst so that they can make a determination, which of these vulnerabilities do I believe are the most serious. From that, again, the security analysts are going to identify, call out false positives. And ThreadFix is going to remember that. So the next time the scanner runs and finds that same false positive, it'll just ignore it. And then those get bundled up and communicated to the development teams and the tools they're already using. So if they're using, Jira or, ALM or whatever tools they're using to manage their workload, you can bundle these vulnerabilities that the security teams care about and turn those into tickets or to backlog, whatever the organization calls it, but you're going to turn them into defect reports in the tools that developers are already using. And it seems like a little bit of like semantic wordplay to say, well, vulnerabilities are what security cares about, but the dev teams work on tickets. But that's actually a very powerful move that we've seen, or that's the change that we've seen. That is a differentiator between security programs that really struggle and the ones that start to make progress. Is you've got to, your security backlog can't be a super special thing. It's just got to be another thing that the developers are doing. And so communicating with the developers via the tools they're already using, the CI/CD pipelines on the one end, the Jira or whatever ALM system on the other end, very powerful. And what we've seen here is up to a 44% reduction in mean time to remediation. The value there is stuff is getting fixed faster, and so you're reducing that risk window. From that, ThreadFix is going to monitor the status of those defects. So that from within ThreadFix, you can see when the development teams register that they think they've closed out a ticket, so that you can then go and retest to identify were they successful in doing that. And then the whole cycle starts all over again with the next build. And all of this, by doing this in one central system, that gives you reporting across all of these different activities so that you can slice and dice data and use that to drive better maturity, because you can look across the different techniques and tools that you're using and identify which ones are the ones that are really finding the vulnerabilities that we care the most about, which ones are we having challenges operationalizing because of false positives and other things. It really gives you that insight so that instead of speaking in fear, uncertainty, and doubt, you can have a much more quantitative set of conversations with your management to run experiments to justify budget decisions that you may need to make. And so that's how, again, kind of our perspective of this from a ThreadFix standpoint is, for all of these sources of data, let's run those through a unified pipeline so that they all work, everything works the same way. And in doing so, get data about the program that we can really use to help drive better data-backed decision-making.
All right, so when we whoops, I think you guys both clicked it at the same time. So when we bring it all together, right, what we're trying to do is help organizations run not just efficient mobile pipelines, but efficient pipelines in general, right? Helping the security development teams, QA teams deal with all of the data and all of the security testing that's actually going on. And what's great about this is we've got a number of joint customers and organizations using both our products, where the automation that we bring to the table is really what gives you the scale, the throughput, the velocity, and frankly helps you flush your backlog more efficiently. So we're both data driven. We both plug into your tool chains. We each plug into dozens of tools, Jenkins, Jira, Azure, pretty much every application security testing tool, every pipeline tool, and so on and so forth. And that makes it work. And so now what you basically have is not only better testing, but you have better test processing, so that the right data makes it to the right developers, so they fix the right things, and you rinse and repeat, and you verify that those things are closed. And that ultimately reduces your bug escape defect rate, your number of security bugs that make it out of the door, which should also reduce the time and the flow necessary in the pipeline. And so, it's about portfolio coverage, right, Dan? It's about how this kind of comes together.
Yeah, and that's kind of the model. Again, the way that I kind of look at the problem is, you're going to have a large enterprise that derives a lot of value from software is going to have different types of applications. To get sufficient coverage for an individual application, you're probably going to need to use different techniques. And so, just looking at this, you have again, horizontally looking to see what are the various applications we have in our portfolio and of the different types. For different applications, what types of testing are we going to use to identify vulnerabilities in those applications? And making a determination, say, well, NowSecure, we're going to use this for all of our mobile and for our APIs. For our web applications, we're using XYZ vendor for static, whatever other vendor for the dynamic, maybe doing interactive. Again, software composition analysis, but looking across the portfolio so that that you've got a plan for any given application. Here is the set of assurance activities we're going to undertake in order to feel confident that we have driven it to, that we've identified the vulnerabilities that are the most serious, that we're concerned about impacting the security of the enterprise.
And so with that, when you kind of bring it all together, right, it's about speed and velocity, right? So how do you scale? How do you use security automation to drive it through faster? We're both big believers in the continuous model, continuous security testing in your pipelines, whatever tools you're using, whatever approach you're using, whatever kinds of apps you're using, automate everything you can. And that gives you the efficiency and speed, which actually ultimately gets you to scale. And so with that, we hope all organizations take a look at this sort of dual mode approach of leveraging, take your existing web testing infrastructure for security, add in best of breed mobile, and then layer over top the vulnerability management and orchestration. All of that gives you security automation, which gets you the faster moving pipes. So I want to remind folks, we're going to do Q&A in a few minutes here right at the end. So please use the Q&A tab to ask questions as I jump my way through. So you've got a story. Tell us a story about one of your customers here from ThreadFix.
Yeah, so it's an organization in the education space, and they had a large portfolio, 2,000 application assets, and they were just really struggling. They had a handful of testers, but they had all their processes were ad hoc. All right, I need a security test. Am I going to send an email? Am I going to send a Slack? Am I going to call somebody on the phone? Right, like there wasn't a unified way for these applications to get driven through. And so with the ThreadFix rollout, also worked with them to standardize their process and to say, here's the workflow. Like this type, an application of this type with this level of risk associated with it. For any given release, it needs to have a static test. It needs to have a dynamic test. It needs to have a pen test. Whatever that was. And by standardizing that and flowing all of that through ThreadFix, they got a 500% increase in the testing. Which is great. We love to see that. Everybody needs to be able to do more with less. That's just the way of the world. And so we were really excited to see that, again, using ThreadFix and standardizing these processes, really able to drive up the throughput for testing, improve the testing processes so they're getting better testing coverage of the individual applications. And again, the real win from a risk management standpoint is a 44% reduction in the mean time to fix for vulnerabilities. And that's what I love to see. Again, getting all of this testing going is fantastic, but you've got to fix stuff on the other end, right? Like testing is only the first part of the process. And so it's great that we're able to work with them to get their testing throughput so much higher. But also a real win is on the flip side of that, they were able to get more stuff fixed faster, which means they're reducing their risk. And at the end of the day, that's really the success marker of a program. Have we taken our organization from one risk profile and have we made that risk picture better for our organization? And so I was really excited working with these folks on the rollout because we saw some really great results.
The volume there is astounding, right? And the throughput that you're able to give through orchestration. I was in the business process automation world many moons ago in a former life, and automation was the thing. So you've got more resources for folks here, right?
Yeah, and obviously you can go to the threadfix.it website, and we've got various webinars and blog posts and things like that. I wanted to highlight a couple of things. This is kind of clustered in two groups. One is looking at your application asset management. And so building out that portfolio, we see a lot of organizations really struggle to know what is all the stuff that they have out there. What are all the web properties? What are all the web services? And even what are all the mobile applications that they have? I've been on phone calls where organizations like discovered that they had more mobile apps than they thought they did because different lines of business had procured them and whatnot. And so you can't defend unknown attack surface. So learning about your attack surface is really important. And so I've got a link to a webinar and a couple of blog posts where we talk about ways to help expand your view of your application portfolio. And also wanted to highlight some resources we made available at Collaboration. That's something especially, has always been important in a COVID global pandemic world. All of a sudden, digital collaboration became even more important overnight. So wanted to highlight some resources we've made available, highlighting some of the collaboration capabilities in the ThreadFix platform. I think those have been of particular interest to organizations as they've been forced to move to an all work remote type of a model.
Very good. So, to wrap up with some case studies on our side, and I'll remind everybody again, use the Q&A tab to please ask us any questions you have. We've got a couple of good ones in so far. I sort of chose the path of, let me tell you about a couple different organizations, right? So, this is all about accelerating pipeline flow with security built in. Caribou Coffee is a great example. A case study was just published on that. You can find that in our website. And they're, a coffee shop who wants lots of people to come to the coffee shop. And they saw an explosion of business with remote workers occurring last year and wanted to add more new features, right? Shop at home, drive by, curbside pickup, all that kind of stuff. And so actually within a quarter's time, they were actually able to automate security and collapse their release cycle. So now they've actually moved to monthly release cycles instead of quarterly release cycles. So not only did they increase their security, they dramatically increased their velocity. If we look at an organization like Allstate, Allstate fits this story that Dan and I are talking about when you've got hundreds of pipelines and thousands of people involved in hundreds of pipelines. And so they built a very strong infrastructure around their mobile digital transformation. They spent the last 5 years, basically building out a whole new tech stack that's very DevSecOps forward, and then used API integration to stub out a lot of their legacy systems. And so they've been able to innovate quickly on top of this infrastructure. And their security people don't do pen testing. Their security people are advisors to the development teams. They coach, they look at security architecture, they do investigative research to know, what future things should they be worried about, because they built all their security and governance into their pipeline infrastructure, including routing and ticketing and all that. So, two really interesting examples. We have plenty more on the NowSecure website for you to read. So I put in a few resources as well here. If you're new to mobile application security, we set up a free course at Cybrary. Takes you about an hour. Learn everything you need to know as a baseline to understand mobile app security. We've got lots of other tools, from 110 pages of secure mobile development best practices to what are the top 5 mobile app security issues you should make sure aren't happening to you that we find in the App Store, and more here. We'd also encourage you to sign up for our bi-weekly All Things Mobile DevSecOps. It's a bi-weekly email that gives you what's going on in DevSecOps, tips and tricks for your coding and for your security testing. Encourage you to take advantage of that. And so with that, it's giveaway time. So one of the things we're doing with the DevSecOps bunch is we are we're giving away some prizes here. So the first question I'm going to ask, so get ready to type into chat. We're going to have 3 prize winners for the first question. We're going to have 3 prize winners for the second question. So the 3 prize winners are the first 3 that answer correctly. We're going to use an interesting question for both ThreadFix and for NowSecure. So for ThreadFix, the question is, how many tools does ThreadFix integrate with? Make your best guess in the chat. We'll wait about 30 seconds to a minute, and then we'll pick the winners. All is not the right answer, but that was a good guess.
When we maintain those integrations, some days it feels like all.
All right, I've seen more than one winner. So the answer is 50 to 52. So I saw a couple people in there with 50 to 52. Kelly, if you want to go harvest the first couple, I'll fill for a minute. So Dan, I didn't even know there were 50 tools. Like what are the more unusual ones and what are the more popular ones you integrate with?
So we integrate with all the major, commercial static analysis, security static analysis, security dynamic analysis tools, most of the software composition analysis vendors, a bunch of open source tools as well. And so kind of all across the spectrum. And then also, again, on the, looking at the application lifecycle management space, the defect trackers, Jira, all the major ones there. a couple of GRC systems, a couple of CI/CD pipelines. So it's quite a ecosystem of tools that we integrate with. And again, philosophically, the way that we look at things is ThreadFix is really targeted toward the folks running the app security program, and then we want to communicate with other stakeholders and the tools that they're already using. Right? We don't want the rank and file developers to need to learn how to use ThreadFix. We want to talk to them in Jira that they're already using, right? We don't want them to have to learn to use ThreadFix to kick off scans. We want them to be able to do that from their Jenkins pipeline. Just looking at it from a standpoint of how can we get things rolled out to them and in as efficient a manner possible so that they can focus on what the organization needs them to be doing.
There you go. All right. So I've got a count of, but it's not count of integrations. So for NowSecure, get ready in your chat box. We'll take the 3 winners. And the question in terms of counting is, and I said it once, you might have heard it. If you look at my website, you can find it. How many mobile security tests does NowSecure perform in its automated test? What is the count of security tests that we perform when we run an automated test? First 3 people will win. And so there are a lot. It's not a small number. It's bigger than your 50, and it looks like I think we've already hit it. So the number is over 200. So the first couple who voted 200 or 200 plus, those would be the winners. It is a battery of over 200. Actually, when you disassemble it, some are tests of tests, meaning multiple test steps. So it's hundreds and hundreds that we actually run. And so that's comprised of static, dynamic, interactive, and API security testing. All of those are part of that process. So Kelly, if you want to pick the first couple of folks who picked 200 or more, and those will also get swag boxes as well. We appreciate you playing our game today. And so while Kelly digs through those, I'm going to move us into the Q&A. We have a couple of questions here that came in. Let me jump over to the question box. I got so much chatter in there. Okay, so first question, complimenting us on an organized presentation. Curious why you didn't include Rasp in any of your slides. So Dan, where does Rasp fit in your world if it does?
Yeah, and so and we've done some, and I would lump WAF and Rasp together, which I'm sure both WAF and Rasp people would not be happy with, but we used to do some integrations with WASP where we could generate very targeted rules, and we looked actually with one of the Rasps at doing an integration to show of the vulnerabilities that you have, this Rasp can protect against these classes of vulnerabilities. So if you turn it on for these applications, you can guard these various things. So we've looked at that. The challenge is just from our perspective, we don't see a lot of, we just didn't see a lot of uptake. There was a lot of enthusiasm for those types of capabilities, or a lot of interest. There wasn't a lot of action that was taken on it. And so that's an area just where we haven't seen a lot of that. Again, you previously had Jeff Williams from Contrast on. He is probably much more in the mix with folks that are doing the Rasp stuff. Just from our standpoint, we haven't seen a lot of it, and so it isn't something that we've emphasized. But again, I think there are some players in the space that are getting a lot of traction, and they've probably got a better perspective of that.
Yeah, and we work with a lot of different vendors. We have a lot of common customers with Contrast. We see a number of their customers using Rasp, others are not. It's a different way to think about and attack the problem, right? So, and the other thing interesting about Rasp is Rasp leans into security operations in the SIM side of the house, right? So interesting about Rasp is if you're running Rasp, should it be integrated with your vuln management, or should the Rasp be integrated with your SIM? Because the attack data that you can learn from it as well. So it wasn't intentional, leaving it out. It was just simply, neither of us have seen as much of it in the market. And Rasp is nearly impossible to do on mobile. So if the person who asked the question wants to talk about that offline, happy to have that conversation. There's a secondary question here, which is, what do you recommend in the sense of automation when it comes to OWASP? I'll answer part. Dan, you may have a thought. So when you look at the OWASP Web Top 10 and the OWASP Mobile Top 10, from a NowSecure perspective, we test against the OWASP Mobile Top 10. So some of the criteria I talked about earlier when I said 85% of App Store apps have one or more security vulnerability, that's actually testing millions of apps using the OWASP Top 10. We also use the OWASP API Top 10 to hit the back-end APIs. So some products make OWASP very visible, so you can actually look at our results based on the OWASP profile. So we do security automation for that. I haven't paid attention to OWASP for the other ones, and I don't know how that might fit in your world, Dan. So what are your thoughts on security automation around OWASP?
And so, like, if like for me, looking at the OWASP has a number of like tools and projects that they support at various levels of maturity, and so so you can certainly like automate a number of their tools. You could put in a pipeline. I think you've got to be honest with yourself about what to expect to get out of, about what to do with those results, or what sort of decisions to make on that. That said, we see a lot of organizations using OWASP Zap, which is their dynamic application security scanner. In a lot of ways, OWASP Zap is really easy to automate in pipelines. It's got a great API to drive it. They've spent a lot of time focusing on that constituency of running that in a pipeline, and so that's one OWASP tool that I have seen a lot of use in the pipeline. Where people say like, hey, I want to run a Zap scan or a Zap scan of some portion of the application, for these various pipeline activities.
That's a really good question. So I'm gonna dig in here. Okay, so this is interesting for you, Dan. So I've been looking at changing my static analysis vendor. How does ThreadFix handle that?
Right. Okay. So, so when ThreadFix pulls in data from a static analysis tool, it normalizes it to our internal format, and so it uses that to potentially do the normalization and deduplication. So if you're running two different static vendors, pull them in, both of them found the same SQL injection. ThreadFix should stitch those together and say, here's what vendor A saw, here's what vendor B saw. If you are switching vendors, from vendor A to vendor B, the default behavior in ThreadFix, you can switch this, but the default behavior is if you have a vulnerability that was found by two different technologies, if one of them no longer sees it, then the vulnerability gets closed out. And so it's kind of like if you can configure it so that like both vendors have to vote that it's gone, but the typical use is to only need one of the vendors to not see it anymore. And so if you're switching vendors, you're going to have your historical body of data in ThreadFix from vendor A. When you run for vendor B, it's going to run scans again, attach new findings to vulnerabilities where there was overlap, and then when those vulnerabilities go away with the new scanner, they'll be closed out in ThreadFix. And so that's something that we see a number of organizations that we work with. Like that's part of the value that ThreadFix brings. Is it gives them some flexibility, to evolve their vendor portfolio over time. But still have access to historical results and have that again all flow up into the same metrics program.
Good question. Good answer. This one's for me. How do you do static and dynamic testing? Dynamic testing is hard to do on web. That has to do again with both our approach of our testing and the nature of web and mobile being a little bit different. So in the mobile world, it is possible to build automation to drive a mobile app. There are hooks in the operating system you can use that will enable an application to be navigated. One of the things that we have done is because we've tested a bazillion apps over the years, we've learned patterns of app screens and app navigation. And so our test engine uses a dynamic navigation capability to navigate through the app and run our dynamic testing. And a lot of our dynamic testing is really attacking the app. So if we detect you're using certificates, we will then try to test your cert pinning. Are you properly using certificates? Can we give you a signed or an unsigned or a self-signed or an invalid certificate? Are you validating host name? We're also looking at the TLS tunnel and looking to see what's encrypted and what's not in that tunnel, right? We're looking how the app is interacting with the file system, possibly leaking data into logs or other places like that. So there's a lot of things we've been able to automate and instrument to stick into that environment. As I said earlier, we kind of have DAST on the outside, which is driving the app, and we have IAST or interactive security testing sitting inside the app while it's running, and the two of them are interacting to collect this massive amount of data that systems like ThreadFix would address. So dynamic is a different beast on mobile, and if you're not doing dynamic, you're missing a lot. And that's often where when we engage in organizations who haven't had a sophisticated test program for mobile, we tend to find a lot of low-hanging fruit to help you clean up around dynamic testing. So it's actually possible to do that. So last one, it has to do with integration. So for you, Dan, what happens if ThreadFix's 50 plus doesn't support a tool they have? How do you handle that?
Right. So we've got we've published a JSON format called cleverly the .threadfix file format. Yeah. That basically allows you to bring in arbitrary results into ThreadFix and have that get fed into the system. And so for a lot of organizations, and it's really pretty easy to write. There's kind of a core set of fields that we use for our normalization and deduping that you've got to fill in, and then there's other fields obviously you can fill out for more robustness of the data. So it's really easy typically to write a converter if you have data coming out of something in a structured format. XML or JSON on one side to put that into the .threadfix file format and upload that. So we try to make it really easy. Again, like we would love to, as I mentioned earlier, we integrate with 50 or so things, which is great. Some days it feels like we have to integrate with all the things. And so while we would love to have native integrations for everything, and again, we work with our customers to prioritize those. If you've got some tooling or internal tooling, or if you've got a new, something new that you want to prototype, it's usually pretty easy to get that data into ThreadFix so that can all flow into that same workflow.
Yeah, that's great. In our world, I'm just going to go ahead and answer for NowSecure, although it wasn't a question for us, is we can integrate with just about anything. We have a standard RESTful API. We have a GraphQL API as well. We've got about a dozen pre-built connectors. Maybe it's nearing 20. One of which we built with you, or you built with us as a partner at ThreadFix, which is great. So all the common CI/CD and ticketing systems are already there in the box. We have customers popping up left and right, who's basically rolling their own integrations because the API is so easy to work with. So we appreciate the partnership with ThreadFix and the integration there, and are easy to integrate with others. So we're coming up near the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and wind us down. I'd like to very much thank you all for attending today. Thank you for the good questions and participating in our polls, as well as our games and fun at the end and the Q&A. Dan, would you like to close with some thoughts?
Yeah, just wanted to thank everybody for spending an hour of your time with us today. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the questions and the participation with the polls and the giveaways. Hope everybody stays safe out there. It's cold right now in parts of the country. So hope everybody's staying safe and healthy, and everybody have a great day.
Very good. And Kelly wanted me to remind everybody, you will get a copy of the recording next week. For those who attended and anybody who registered and missed it, you can also share it with your friends at work. And you can reach out to us. We can give you a copy of the slides as well. So we'll be in touch with some folks who asked for copies of slides. Once again, this is our February 2nd in the series of our DevSecOps bunch webinars. Thank you for participating. Thanks for Dan for joining us. Next month, we'll be with MindGrub, and we'll be talking about secure by design and trust but verify. So stay tuned. We'll see you next month. Be well, everybody. Goodbye now.